let's talk about layer blending and blending modes because there's some really powerful things that we can do inside of Photoshop. In fact, when it comes to Photoshop and what we've been talking about here, Photoshop for photographers, your blend modes are typically some of the main reasons why we might use layers and come into Photoshop in the first place, again from Camera Raw or Lightroom. All right, so best way I can show you this is I need to get two layers together because that's really where blending and blend modes come into play, is when you have one layer on top of another layer. So I've got a photo open here. I'm going to do what we did before. We can go select all right, and then I've got this texture open. So I'm just going to go, first I need to copy, of course, edit, copy, and then let's switch over to the texture and I'll paste. So now I've got one photo on top of another photo. Ooh, by the way, let me show you a quick little tip here. Let me delete. Ooh, there's another tip. God, there's like tips on top of tips here. Okay, first, if you press the delete key, that deletes a layer. It's just like dragging it to the trash can down here. It deletes the whole layer. But let's go back over here. You know how I did select all? Well, let's say, and this goes back to the example of copying and pasting text from one document to another. I could select all, which would select all the text, or I can take any one of my selection tools. I'll take the rectangular marquee tool here, and I can select a portion and then copy, go over here. I just use a keyboard shortcut and paste it in. You can see it's just pasted that square portion. So you don't have to take all of the image. You can only take separate or part of the image if you want. But let's go ahead and select all again. We'll copy, and then I'll paste that one in. And notice we have 3 layers in here. I'm just going to click on the middle one and hit the delete key. So now I have 2 layers on top of each other. This is where we can start to blend layers together. And one of the first ways you can blend layers is with opacity, layer opacity. 100% opacity means I can't see through this layer at all. Even though I know if we're thinking about stacking, I'm stacking one piece of paper on top of another piece of paper. All right. Even though I know that there's something below it, I can't see it. I can't see it because the piece of paper that's on top is not see-through at all, okay? The opacity, if you will, is set to 100%. So what I'll do here is I can go to the opacity slider and I can start to decrease it. And now it's starting to blend and it's showing me part of the layer that's below this. Well, what layer was below that? It's the texture layer. That's if I turn that one off, you can see it. So because we have opacity, we can start to blend the two. As I get down to 0% opacity, that's basically meaning, it essentially means I've hidden the entire top layer. Okay, the opacity is set to 0%, means I can't see any of the top layer, means I will only see whatever was below it. Again, as I start to increase it, you'll start to see part of it come back. So that's one way that we can blend images together, is opacity. And opacity is probably the most popular, but we also have something called blend modes. Okay, and blend modes are a good editing tool for us because it blends your layers in a different way. So a blend mode, if you come over here to right next to opacity, click on normal, you'll see all these different blending options here. These are called blend modes. So I'm going to tell you right off of the bat, there's only 4 that you really need to worry about. Remember, this is a beginner's class. My job is not to tell you everything in here. My job is only to tell you the stuff you need to know. And I can tell you right now, I very rarely, after 15, 20 years of using Photoshop, I very rarely use any other blend modes than these 4. That is multiply, screen, overlay, and soft light. All right, those are the key 4. So let's click on multiply, see what happens. See the difference? It's kind of like opacity, but it's a little bit different. All right, it's a little bit different because it made everything darker. Opacity was actually fading this image. This made everything darker. Screen is the exact opposite of multiply. Screen makes everything brighter. All right, and it's not only looking at the layer on top, but it's looking at both. And that's how layer blend modes work. It's blending those two together. Multiply is saying, I want you to blend them together. I want you to make everything darker. Screen is saying, I want you to blend them together, make everything brighter. Overlay and soft light are both pretty much the same things, but they're just different intensity levels. All right. Soft light adds contrast. It still blends the two together, but it adds contrast as well, where overlay is just a punchier version of soft light. the only thing, okay? They both work the same. They both add contrast. One is just a little bit more punchy than the other one. You can see there's just two differences right there. Okay, so that's kind of basics on blend mode. So let's jump to another example here. Let's jump to multiply. So what I could do is I could use the same image to blend on top of each other, and this is pretty common. What we'll do is we'll press Command J on the Mac or Control J on a PC, and that means duplicate the layer, right? Makes a copy of your layer. Let me undo again. Command or Control J duplicates the layer. Well, by in and of itself, I can change opacity. I can do nothing has changed because it's just one layer on top of another. But if I blend them, now things will change. So for example, what I want to do here is I think the sky looks okay. There is so much haze and everything in the foreground here that the foreground kind of looks faded. All right. Well, and it looks bright. It looks light. What we can do is we can change it to multiply, which would make it darker. All right. So that's before. That's after. Big change, right? Now, don't forget that these are layers. What can we do on layers? Well, we can erase parts of layers. I think the sky gets a little bit radioactive to me. So I could take the eraser tool, all right? I can get a nice large size brush here, and I can paint up in the sky, and I can start to remove the sky. I erased the sky away. Well, what did it show? It showed the original sky that was on the layer below, but since I only erased the sky and not the rest of it, now I see all the darkened area, the multiply layer effect that we got here. And don't forget, because it's on a layer, I can reduce the opacity. If it's too much, I can split the difference. I don't have to go to 0, which is nothing, but I don't have to stay at 100. I could go right in the middle, and I could split the difference here. All right, let's move on to another example. So we'll go over to, here's another example with multiply. All right, I've got this image right here, got this portrait, and I've got this image of a frame, all right, this kind of grungy frame. Well, I want to show you something that happens with multiply and screen. So let's go to select all, copy, and then I'm just going to paste it over on top of this image. All right, well, watch what happens here. If I change it to multiply, it drops out the white. Multiply, while it darkens everything like we saw here, all right, one thing it also does is it removes white. So while you're thinking we'd have to go through all these hoops if we wanted the photo to show up in this frame and kind of erase it all out from these edges and you have to get really detailed with it, we don't. We just have to go over to multiply and it'll totally drop out the white. And now I can see the photo below here. And I didn't have to do any selections or anything like that. All right. The opposite of multiply is screen. So if you think about this before you look at it, multiply dropped out the white. What is screen going to do? Because it's the exact opposite of multiply. It'll drop out the black. So when I change this to screen, what are you going to see here? All right, just kind of think about it for a second. White showed me the photo. All right, well, now I'm going to see the photo wherever it's black, which is not going to look very good, but I'll show you anyway. Okay, so you could see kind of bits and pieces of the photo in there because it's dropped out the black, and now I see the photo below that, but it's kept the white. All right, let's take a look at another example of screen, and this is something that I do quite often. All right, I'm going to duplicate the layer, Command or Control J. I think their faces are kind of, they're a little bit too dark. So I can go over here, and I can change this to screen. Screen totally blows out the rest of the photo. So what I can do now is take my eraser tool and I can erase. And I'm erasing from the background, but I'm just going to keep the brighter faces. All right, and we would probably come up here and make your brush a little bit smaller, and you'd probably want to get a little bit more detailed inside here. But you guys kind of get the idea. Take a look. That's before. That's after. Again, before, after. If you want to make it a little bit easier on yourself, I'll delete this layer. Just hit the delete key. You could always come over here and make a selection. Hold down the Shift key. See the little plus next to the lasso? All I did was take the lasso tool. Made a selection, hold down the Shift key, that adds to the selection, make another selection. Remember, Command or Control J duplicates the layer. Well, if I have a selection, Command or Control J just duplicates part of the layer. Okay. Now I can change that to screen. And now I have less to erase. That's the only thing that this did for me is I take my eraser tool and now I just kind of erase all that stray extra area around their faces here. And I didn't have to erase the whole image. So it just made it a little bit easier. And again, you've got the opacity setting here. You don't have to take it at 100. You don't have to take it at 0. You could go somewhere in between and you could brighten their faces just a little bit here. Just to show you another thing that we can do here, let's click the delete key, Command or Control J to duplicate. Remember we talked about contrast, all right? Overlay, soft light. So if I change this to overlay, all right, the whole image gets contrasty. I think that's too punchy. We'll change it to soft light. See, it all gets contrasty. I think it's too much over their faces and their bodies, but I think the background actually kind of looks a little bit more saturated. Looks pretty good. So what do? We take the eraser tool and I just paint over them. And now I'm erasing that blend mode over them, but I left it on the background. So that's what blend modes can do for us. They're a little bit different from opacity. Opacity is just basically turning a layer on or turning a layer off or somewhere in between. Where blend modes look at both layers, all right? Opacity is just one layer. Blend modes actually look at both layers, and depending on all the tones and the colors and everything that are in those layers, it'll blend them together based on all that. So it's not just opacity. It's not just going to make it see-through, but it's going to make it see-through and darker or brighter or more contrasty, depending on which blend mode that you choose.